And next, I will ask Jane to call the roll.
Regent Bartel.
Here.
Regent Bradley.
Here.
Regent Crane.
Here.
Regent Drew. Regent Evers. Here. Regent Falbo.
Here.
Regent Higgins.
Here.
Regent Menegheed.
Here.
Regent Pointer.
Here.
Regent Pruitt.
Here.
Regent Roberts.
Here.
Regent Shervin.
Here.
Regent Smith.
Here.
Regent Spector.
Here.
Regent Tyler.
Here.
Regent Vasquez. Regent Walsh. Regent Whitburn.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you, Jane. I am pleased to convene our December meeting as the guest of UW-Madison. Our thanks to Chancellor Ward and his team for their warm hospitality. And I know we've just begun to see the extent of it. I don't know if you've had a chance to look around the new Union South building we're in, but I encourage you to do so. It's well worth your time. I've had a little chance, but I want to look more as well. My first task this morning is one of the best parts of my job. I'm pleased to introduce our three newest members of the board, and I've asked each of them, after I introduce them, if they'd like to say a couple words, and they will. And so I anticipate that we'll have some comments from each of our new regents, and then we'll go back to business. Well, they're all sitting together, Brent said. My first introduction is Regent Tim Higgins, who is the owner and principal of Cairo Services, a consulting firm based in Appleton that is focused on health care payment reform issues and the integration of complementary and traditional medicine. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from UW-Madison and his law degree from IT Kent College of Law in Chicago. He has served 2 terms on the Wisconsin Alumni Association National Board and was honored as the Alumni Advocate of the Year in 2005. So, Tim, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Regent Spector. True story. In 1977, I was a graduate student on the campus in the Department of Educational Administration. My graduate advisor, Professor Joe Kaufman, a wonderful mentor who helped Sergeant Shriver start the Peace Corps, served as Dean of the students here at UW, and as President of Rhode Island College, but who has unfortunately shuffled off this mortal coil, asked me why I was pursuing the degree. Maybe it was a subtle hint that he didn't think I'd make it as a high school principal. But I think it surprised him when I said that I thought it was good preparation because I wanted to be a UW Regent. I never completed the graduate program because job commitments took me away from Madison, but in the intervening years, I've tried to stay close to the UW. Through the Wisconsin Alumni Association, I've had the opportunity to participate in promoting diversity on the Madison campus as a member of the WAA's Diversity and Inclusivity Council, and in legislative advocacy, I can say that, as a participant in the Alumni for Wisconsin group. I am most proud of a program that my wife Jonna and I started in 1998 through our local WAA chapter. We raised $10,000 from local businesses to begin a recruitment effort targeting Hmong high school students from the Fox Valley. Working with the Hmong American Partnership Fox Valley, every year we bring over 100 kids to Madison, where they meet with the admissions office staff and with their older sisters, brothers, cousins, and friends who are already UW students. The result has been that over 100 students have matriculated at Madison, and the vast majority of those have graduated. It's a great pleasure to follow the successes of those first-time-in-the-family college grads, because many of them return to their adopted roots in the Fox Valley. Now, I hope that my ongoing connection with the UW will help me learn more quickly about the system so that I can participate productively in its governance during these trying times. I'm proud to be placed among such a distinguished group of citizen volunteers, and I hope to live up to the responsibilities that go with the honor of serving. Thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you. Regent Gary Roberts of Onalaska is the President and CEO of Morrison Creek Cranberry Corporation, based in Warrens, Wisconsin. He has extensive experience managing and owning restaurants, including the 1990 National Restaurant of the Year Piggy's Restaurant in La Crosse. Gary is alumnus of UW-La Crosse, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Political Science and Psychology. He has served on several boards in the Cooley region, including the La Crosse Area Convention and Visitors Bureau and the La Crosse Chamber of Commerce. Gary.
Thank you, Regent Inspector. I don't know how I can follow all that, but I think that my career started as an entrepreneur, and I think being an entrepreneur is what I bring to this table. When I was 10 years old, I wasn't old enough to be a paper boy, so I lied to my dad and told him I was going to the swimming pool and hitchhiked to Fort McCoy and shine shoes. On a good day, we'd get a quarter for a pair of shoes in those days, and bad days it was a nickel. But ever since then, I've had a job, and I think I've been creative in developing my entrepreneurial attitude in life. One of my most proud service was the Riverfest in La Crosse, Wisconsin, about 25 some years ago. I put together 3 or 4 people, and we suggested that in La Crosse it was pretty quiet during the 4th of July with festivals going on all over the state and the country, and I suggested we should have a festival in La Crosse, and went further to say since we had a river going through the downtown area of La Crosse, it should be called Riverfest. There was a million roadblocks in the way. The mayor, the council, I mean, everybody said it couldn't happen, that we had an Oktoberfest and that we didn't need another festival. But at any rate, no was not the answer. And I ended up standing in a chair one time talking to people saying, let's not talk about what we can't do, let's find ways to do it. And the results are clear. It's now probably at least the second most successful festival in La Crosse, and sometimes it's more comfortable because Oktoberfest gets a little cooler. So I think that my strengths are I don't accept no for an answer. In my restaurants, I think not all were as successful as Piggy's, but my goal was to exceed expectations, and I think the results came out that way, and that would be my goal here. I'm honored to be here with this distinguished group of people, and thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Regent Jerry Whitburn of Wausau is the chairman of the board of Church Mutual Insurance Company in Merrill. He has an extensive background in business and government, having served as labor secretary in Wisconsin and secretary of health and human services in both Wisconsin and Massachusetts. He received his bachelor's degree in political science and history from UW-Oshkosh and a Master of Arts degree in political science from UW-Madison. He is a director of the Wisconsin Policy Research Institute and the Natural Resources Foundation in Wisconsin, and serves on the National Advisory Council of the Marshfield Clinic. Jerry.
Thank you, President Spector. This is a high honor. I serve on the Board of Visitors Political Science here on the Madison campus. We come together at North Hall, oldest building in the whole system. Nice to be here in one of the newest buildings in the whole system. For many years I served on the board of WICAD, which is the Wisconsin Center for the Academically Talented Youth. As some of you know, it is the principal advocate for gifted and talented in Wisconsin. The entity has now been merged into the School of Education here on the Madison campus. Both of these assignments I will leave if I'm confirmed by the Senate, which is the stop this afternoon that the three of us will have to make. I came here immediately following undergraduate school to do graduate work and to serve on the governor's staff. 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated. and we had to bring the National Guard onto our campus here for the first time in the history of the campus. Very electric days. Needless to say, people like myself who were involved learned a great deal. And I think that all of us continue to learn much in this ever-evolving organization that we're a part of. I think this is the 8th largest public system in America. It enjoys a wonderful reputation worldwide. I think that Fortune 500 CEOs across America, more come from Wisconsin than any others, which is a wonderful, wonderful tribute to the excellence of the system. It is a high honor now to have an opportunity to join with all of you to try to make the system even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. As Jerry said, our colleagues are going up to the Capitol this afternoon for their confirmation hearing, so we wish them the very best. And of course, on behalf of all of us, I say welcome aboard, and thank you for contributing your time and your efforts and your wisdom to our Wisconsin public higher education. While we're on the subject of people in new positions, I know Kevin has something to tell us about as well.
Thank you, President Spector. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Happy holidays. A special welcome, my own personal one, to the new Regents. I look forward to working with each of you in the years ahead. It's with the proverbial mixed feelings that I acknowledge that UW-La Crosse Provost Kathleen Enns Finken, who's here at our meeting today. This will be the last time we'll have the opportunity to recognize her. Kathleen is leaving UW-La Crosse later this month to become the provost at Cal Poly University in San Luis Obispo, California. She has now put her snow boots, scarves, and shovels up for sale on eBay, so if you want a cheap deal on them, you might go there. I know that's a big concern for her that she won't need those anymore. It's a wonderful opportunity for Kathleen, and they're lucky to get her, but I know she will be deeply missed at UW-La Crosse and in the system and in the state. So, Kathleen, on behalf of all your UW colleagues, thank you for your service and all best wishes in California. I'm pleased to add that Chancellor Gao has asked Betsy Morgan to serve as interim provost and vice chancellor for academic affairs at UW-La Crosse. Dr. Morgan has 3 years of experience in the provost's office there, having served as faculty assistant to the provost from 2005 to 2008. And she also has more than 7 years' experience as chair of UWL's very well-regarded psychology department. So we look forward to working with her in her new role, Joe, and if you'll give her our best wishes, that would be great. With that, back to you, President Spector.
Thank you. I'd also like to call your attention that we're going to have some visitors joining us later today. I don't think they're here now, although I've seen them in the building this morning, and they are the participants in the UW Colleges and Extension Leadership Academy. I had the interesting experience of meeting them for an hour yesterday, talking about leadership and how our board works and what the committees do, among many other things. So they are going to be very interested in what occurs this afternoon, and you all have to be on your best behavior and your most analytical in terms of committee work. Please say hello to them when you see them this afternoon. Turning now to the business of the day, UW-Madison, our extraordinary flagship institution, is today's host presenter. Its quality, influence, and deserved acclaim happened neither by accident nor overnight. They resulted in significant part from the kind of careful, forward-thinking planning you will hear David Ward speak about now, and it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Interim UW-Madison Chancellor David Ward.
Before I begin my remarks, I want to make 3 prefatory comments. The music you heard probably hard to concentrate on, it was actually from the Pro Arti Quartet, which celebrates 100 years anniversary today, or this year I should say. It's the longest continuously performing quartet in the world. It was founded in Brussels 100 years ago. In 1942, 41, 42, they were performing in Madison. Hitler invaded Holland and Belgium, and so the then president, one of my predecessors, invited him to stay in Madison, and since then they have been a fixture in the Madison musical scene. Many discs available, and they have actually contracted with 4 new pieces of music, each of which they'll play at 4 different concerts during the course of the year. So we're very proud to celebrate their 100th anniversary. This building, of course, is something that I saw as an idea when I left in 2000, and now it's a reality. The administration has nothing to do with it. It just is the good taste of our students, creatively put together with revenue, program revenue, their own commitments and so on. And it truly is a remarkable building, which all of us really enjoy. It's really a collective enjoyment. And by the way, about 20 or so students will be at lunch at various tables. If you wish to sample the precocity and the extraordinary vitality of some of our students, they will be available at lunch. And finally, for those of you who don't like long walks from this facility to the, I keep calling it the Alveum, it's the Chazen, there will be a shuttle available, but it's only about 4 or 5 blocks. We look forward to seeing all of you there at 4:30 this afternoon. Truly a remarkable addition to the campus as well within the framework of the arts. I should say a few words that obviously I'm now back barely 4 months. Being back is a little like wearing old clothes. It's a very familiar place. On the other hand, I find a very difficult and different fiscal environment, one that's extremely challenging, and I'm sure we all share in how to face the reality of that challenge. What I thought I would talk about today is a sort of strategic approach to the fiscal situation we find ourselves in. But I would like to say a couple of other words first. One of them is I was president of ACE, which is the National Association of College Presidents. It includes comprehensive research universities, ASCU institutions, small privates, the Ivy League, the community colleges. So it's a broad range of 1,800 institutions. And therefore, one of my roles was to try to speak with one voice about all of American higher education. What really struck me was the fact that the environment had changed, and all institutions, irrespective of their mission, were having to adapt. And what I find often at the institutional level is there is a certain myopia, even at the state level, about the problems we face. They're actually national, they're actually global. They have a local expression, but the broader context is being faced by everybody in different, creative, and regressive ways. And at ACE, one of the few things that I felt I had going for me was to have been once Chancellor of UW-Madison. It was amazing how much credibility that gave to me. I didn't realize that I would once again gain that credibility once again. Whether it's deserved or not, I don't know, but at least the association was pretty critical to me in working not only with comprehensive research universities, but with the full range of American higher education. And I might add that that credibility came from being in a system which it seemed to me also had national credibility, and the combination of a major research university embedded within a system, I think, gave me enormous plausibility as I tried to advocate for higher education in Washington. The other thing that I did, and this is the more awkward part, is I used to recommend improvements to chancellors and presidents as president of ACE. You know, reform, improve, let's cope, all sorts of gratuitous advice. And I remember one angry group of presidents, after I'd given this advice, said, well, weren't you once a chancellor? I said, yes. Why didn't you do it then? Little did I know that I was going to come back and have that role again, so my hypocrisy is on show today. Let me say a few words about where we need to go. This is a strategic approach to resource stewardship. Pretty pretentious title. By strategic, I mean I would like to move away from a preoccupation with the arithmetic of cuts, the arithmetic of the, if you like, econometric and fiscal challenges we face, and ask, under those circumstances, what is the strategy to deal with it? Much of the dialogue, both in the political sector and to a lesser degree, I think, in our own sector, is about the magnitude of the changes that we're going on. We understand the magnitude, but the nature of the responses, I think we're just less clear about. And I think the core of that response is a concept of joint stewardship between the governing board, between faculty, staff, administrators, and students, and between the political sector, which is, after all, has a significant equity interest in our enterprise. And so I'm using the word stewardship to try to create a more neutral language that allows all of us to talk about the same issue, which is in effect a serious funding problem that has to be solved in relation to higher education. But it's not just a state problem, it truly is a national, and I might add also to some degree a global problem. So that's the purpose of the title, and I think this is what I try to look at as the problem. It really is a problem in the distribution of revenues and the magnitude of revenues. I think throughout the post-World War II period, if we go back to 1945 to 60, there was a democratic idealism, and there was a Cold War that also gave credibility to the advancement of science and knowledge. There was an older knowledge economy than the one we have now, and there was a deep commitment to access and low-cost higher education. And there was an idea that you could have low-cost and high quality. It was a very deeply embedded value when perhaps about 20% of the age group that normally go to college went to college. It was affordable. What we have now faced is the limits of mass higher education. Well over two-thirds of the age group that traditionally go to college are going to college. And the demands of the knowledge economy have costs that would be unimaginable to the Congress and the state legislatures that had this idealism back in 1945. So what has happened since 1945 to about the year 2000 has been a sort of pendulum in which there have been good times and bad times. And all of us in higher education really did believe it was a pendulum, that you could survive bad times because the good times would return. The problem is that beginning in the late 90s and throughout the last decade, the pendulum has fallen off its pin. It's no longer swinging. It's lying on the ground. And whether there's any blame to that is irrelevant. It's a fact, a reality that we have to face. If it's not swinging, then what other concept can we begin to look at in terms of good times and bad times? And I think it's fairly clear that the idea of how the state subsidy and tuition together have, in fact, over that period of time, been in a zero-sum game until quite recently in most states the sum of those two is now declining. So the core budget is no longer simply trading tuition for state funding, but actually there is probably an absolute decline. So that this pendulum presents a real problem. For a long time, no major revenue gains for standard tuition increments. Only special tuition increments gave us a revenue gain. And in the business community, when you put up the price, you get no new revenues, people are actually puzzled by that. But that's been the case for higher education. Federal and philanthropic funds, to the degree that they're important, and at Madison they're incredibly important, 45% federal, probably 15% philanthropic, they are designed and given to us as the margin of excellence. They're not really designated or organized to be the core budget. And so what has been going on has been an impoverishment of the core budget, even though the total revenues have gone up. It's very hard for me to complain that during the last decade we're in pain. The revenues have actually gone up, but their composition has changed dramatically, and it's that core budget which is leveraging the remainder that is a problem for us. And so I think public universities with very different missions are facing a challenge of the adequacy of the core budget. They can do things to themselves, they can ask for more money, they can think of different tuition policies, they can find private gifts, but the core budget is in fact the challenge that we're facing. And what I think we have to imagine is how are we going to address that issue. And this is where I come up to the idea of the stewardship. When we deal with strategic planning in our campuses, we think about the purposes. What is it we do? Education, research, outreach, stimulate regional economic development, serve democratic values, and a whole variety of things. But deep down, we have a resource challenge now. We didn't, I think, in the 50 years following World War II, worry that much about resource. Our fixation was on doing the things we wanted to do, and we invariably found new money to do that. So that the core budget was kind of lying there. Now the core budget is no longer something we can take for granted. As long as we took it for granted, new money could allow us to do the things we wanted to do. Now the old money is challenged, and it is the source of the leverage. So the nature of that core money is critical. And as you see at the bottom, I'm paying in my second term more attention to that maroon, the idea of a public-private partnership. What kind of partnership should it be? The critical role of alumni and friends of the university over and above and beyond legislative appropriation. And that, in effect, how to be a steward of these multiple resources is the collective challenge we all have. And the word steward, it seems to me, is a word we need to think of. This is a public investment grounded on a public-private partnership. It is a commitment to the future. It's not a short-term payoff. It's a long-term payoff. And therefore, the issue of stewardship, it seems to me, provides a language of discourse that maybe takes out of some of the edge where people feel there is a blame here. Let's look forward and let's figure out collectively we can be stewards of our future, because higher education is indispensable to it. Let me now show you this diagram, and you'll see the funding graph. I've divided the resources that we normally think about on the right-hand side here: auxiliary revenue, tuition, and state funding. That's the core of what we do at UW-Madison. It's probably less than a third of our total revenue now. That doesn't include buildings. Buildings are now almost 80% sustained by private activity. This is just the operating budget, and it's a big one. Above there, you see the margin of excellence, the thing that makes UW-Madison and other institutions different from their peers. It is, of course, philanthropy. Most donors want to make the difference to the margin of excellence, and research and technology transfer. They, too, are in effect unusual, and they are investing in the most precocious research on the campus. The funding gap is not there. We're growing the two things above there, although they will be challenged. Federal funding will be challenged. Technology transfer is changing in its nature. But the funding gap is there. And the leverage of the bottom three on the top can create some jeopardy. If, in fact, you don't have enough adequate core funding, as you know, in the business world, you can impoverish your leverage. I think we're getting to the levels in many of our state universities where the sum of state funding and tuition may be too low to entice the kind of funding from the federal government that usually likes to match, or from philanthropists who also usually like to do things that are dramatically affecting the margin of excellence. And so I think that balance is one of the areas that we have to be concerned about. How can we begin to attract it? I think, depending on your mission, there may be a variety of strategies. There's no one strategy, but the way I've tried to think about it is to put resource stewardship in the plan. The stewardship of resources, multiple resources. And you'll notice what I've done is I had to download into the core budget some things that come from the above, what's the leverage budget. Both philanthropy and research and technology transfer, in different ways, will have to be a creative part of the core budget. What do I mean by that? Most of our named chairs given by donors provide supplementary research support, very rarely salary support. We're going to have to say, if you want your name on a chair, it can't be a stool anymore. It will have to be fully endowed with some salary. We're going to need the help in the base budget from some of our gifts, and I want to tell you it's not easy. In the issues of technology transfer, WARF and the UW Foundation are both being important donors to us, but I think increasingly they will have to figure out how can we seed research. In other words, if we're going to be successful in technology transfer, it's not only the current research that's important to us, but when young professors arrive on campus, are we seeding their capacity to be future leaders in technology transfer? Seed money is core money. It used to come from the state or from tuition, the conventional revenues. Finally, I think the remaining ones down here, the educational innovation, are a little different. Educational innovation, and what's missing from here is another one, administrative streamlining. There should be, I guess this slide I didn't edit very carefully, there would have been another line there called administrative streamlining. What would happen is that we can actually have self-inflicted savings or self-generated savings. In terms of educational innovation, I think there are many things that we could do with respect to what I call reform of learning and the acquisition of knowledge. And in administration, there are a variety of things we can do in terms of streamlining. Let me move on very quickly to what might be thought of as some of the things we might do. Before we move on to changing philanthropy, changing research, changing the way we think about administration, we still have to make sure that the sources that are critical to us, the equity interest of the state and of students and their families, remain something that is critical to us. Obviously, promoting moderate but targeted tuition increases, maybe that is necessary. I think with loan levels for students at the levels they are, I would no longer place that as one of our highest priorities. I think there is a loan bubble that is being created by tuition and the substitution of loans for grants that means that we need to be extremely prudent how we develop tuition policy. I think there are areas of our campuses where there could be targeted increases. They have to be value added. They can't be entitlements. The other thing, of course, is to sustain state support because it leverages other funds. The system and state flexibility, something that we've talked a lot about, you certainly did in the spring, increased institutional autonomy. By the word autonomy, I don't mean independence. I simply mean the elbow room to be creative in an entrepreneurial sense within the institutional mission. This system is great, not because we're all the same, but because in different ways we've defined our mission within a niche that serves the purpose of the state at large. For Madison, in many respects, access is a very challenging issue. And yet we have others with the same trademark providing access in far more creative ways than we are. That should be an indelible connection between UW-Madison and other campuses. There are interinstitutional relationships in engineering between UW-Milwaukee and UW-Madison, between Eau Claire, I think, in nursing and social work, and Madison. Interinstitutional linkages are going to be indispensable to campus survival in the 21st century. Institutional autonomy, in a narrow sense, doesn't work, but the autonomy to create your own direct interinstitutional relationships is pretty critical. Secondly, the personnel systems. In general, when you're in a state system, you actually are run like a state agency. That is the principle that the more people you report to you, the greater your seniority. We like to reward people by brainpower. If nobody reports to Jamie Thompson and he gets the Nobel Prize, why should I care how many people report to him? The critical thing is the brain power and the leverage of the brain power. That's nothing to do, and that's why perhaps in some senses we need to understand better the nature of the knowledge economy and what is a personnel system in a knowledge economy. A high-tech company would be a better model than a state agency. And finally, the reallocation of base funding. There's a lot of legacy stuff in our base budgets, entitlements that have built up over the years. I think in the last budget, not only was there flexibility with respect to personnel offered to us, but also I think a greater degree of flexibility on base reallocation. We don't know how to do that very well. Everybody claims we do, but we tend to nibble at the edges rather than have major structural attacks. I think it will take time to develop that capacity, and also I think it needs a 5-year time cycle. You can't injure students who are in programs that perhaps are vulnerable. There's got to be a cycle time to the kind of reform that reallocation demands. It is not 6 months and it is not 1 year. It is the cycle time of education. Philanthropy I've already mentioned to you. Increased investment in the base budget, need-based aid to ensure access. This is something that my predecessor paid a lot of attention to, and I will too. Fully endowed professorships, and in particular, funds for educational innovation. Educational innovation, I think, and administered excellence are two areas that we can do to ourselves. Our stewardship, not the funding that's provided by the state or by foundations. Educational innovation involves rethink how we educate. Clearly, we have not used blended delivery to the degree we can. And the fusion of distance education and residential learning. There are a lot of areas that we can look at where we know from our understanding of cognition, great breakthroughs in our understanding of the brain and the different ways in which 18-year-olds learn. I think that's important. But by the way, it's nothing to do with standards. It is providing customized and variable delivery. The genius of technology is the avoidance of standards which are frequently lower than the top part of the curve of talent we're treating with. What we need to do as we're into mass higher education is deal with variability. There needs to be minimum standards, but there also needs to be a consciousness of different ways in which individuals learn, and in fact, to take advantage of the research on our own campuses that understand learning in relation to new knowledges of how the brain evolves. Rethink academic structures. Our structures are disciplinary structures. We do have some interdisciplinary structures, but they run horizontally across a deep set of silos. We keep saying this. I was saying it 15 years ago. But there are ways I think we could rethink academic structures. It's not really a matter of eliminating them. Probably it is a matter of how to merge creatively into 21st century knowledge categories. I'll give you an example from our medical school. Medical school, since the middle 19th century, has always started with anatomy, physiology, and pharmacology. Everybody went into those disciplines, but they're no longer disciplines which are the essence of the running frontier of medical research. So our medical school decided, are these the right subjects for new medical students to be taking? They merged the three programs and divided them in two. One of them is now called regenerative medicine. The other one is called neuroscience. We have 21st century categories. Anatomy and physiology are embedded within those larger, more conceptual delivery arrangements. We got a completely different structure of people and resources, and from what I gather, the quality of the infrastructure of the two programs versus the original three is infinitely better. We raised up to the level where there are certain scale economies in the infrastructure that departments require. Rethink comprehensiveness. This is a very critical issue. Because obviously we may not be able to deliver everything everywhere. The genius of this system has been that redundancy and duplication is far less than most other states. This is one of the things that the system has achieved. However, comprehensiveness when resources are diminishing, or comprehensiveness that's changing because of new areas of study, microbiology, media studies. There is a changing nature of what it is that is the intellectual configuration of knowledge. And in my judgment, comprehensiveness that we have right now is the comprehensiveness of about 1950 or 1960. We need to rethink a comprehensiveness that makes sense for the current time. And I believe it's going on, but it's going on at an individual or a small group level. It's very hard to build it up to a large scale. And that's my final point. Scale best practices for maximum gain. Everything I've said that is a reform in this presentation is currently occurring on the Madison campus. I'm overwhelmed by the amount of innovation. I'm overwhelmed by the response to flexibility, but I'm underwhelmed by our capacity to scale it upwards. We work as independent contractors at a cellular scale. It is very hard in our culture to scale up. The best practices should be scaled. There should be peer learning. Departments that have reformed themselves should be models for others. That's the way to do this, not through a command structure. That's what we're trying to do, is to in fact take best practices, not invent them, they're there, and in fact scale them upwards. The other area where I think we can be stewards of ourselves is administrative excellence. Information technology on most campuses does not look like that in the corporate world. It is very, very idiosyncratic, built from the bottom up, and rarely conceived top down. Space management and reduction of lease space. Really, the computer programming for how to allocate space to classrooms, not have courses that students are required to take offered at the same time. Smaller institutions probably have an easier time in rationalizing that, but most large, comprehensive research institutions do a very poor job of handling what I would call space assignment. Demand management of supplies is a no-brainer. We claim we do it, but we could do it much better. Coordinating a facilities organization and streamlining the grants management process. All of these have significant gains, but the important thing is they have to be reinvested in educational innovation. if we just lose these because it looks like we're becoming more cost effective. We need internal ways of keeping our savings in order to invest in ourselves. If the cuts that we go through destroy the savings, and that's why the morale is low right now on some of our campuses, is there are cuts are being made, but then there is another cut. It's like water torture. That is the problem. The innovation cycle gets broken. That's the main cost, not the money. It's the cost of the innovation cycle being broken because the internal capitalization of that innovation cycle is lost. Finally, I would be amiss if I didn't say that this campus does have a major research commitment. Nationally, globally, much of our identity is the volume, magnitude, and impact of our research. And I now want to turn to the Provost, Paul DeLuca, because even in that area, we need some systemic changes in order to be stewards, to be better stewards. All of this is about our stewardship and hoping that from good stewardship, the state interest, the students' commitment can be, in a sense, preserved. Rather than just looking at the magnitudes of the cuts, it seems to me we need to, in addition to that, say this is what we will do to reach out in order to, in a sense, say we are part of the solution ourselves. We must be a key part of the solution. And out of that, perhaps, a partnership in stewardship can be reconnected so that the public partnership that is so critical to our survival, people will feel empowered to reinvest. That's where I'm going. Idealistic, I know. And those of you who are cynical may feel, well, whistle in the wind. However, as you hear the Provost, I think you will realize that there is more at risk than just the welfare of our democratic society. If we are part of a knowledge economy of the 21st century, the actual structure, the nodal points of that knowledge economy lie in some of the key comprehensive research institutions here. And even though we get lots of accolades for that function, there too we can make improvements. So right now I'd like to turn to Paul, who will now take this to the next area, which is enhancing our research excellence.
Thank you, David, so much. What the Chancellor has discussed here is really, in his usual extraordinarily articulate manner, is three mechanisms we can change the course of the aircraft carrier. The agility of the institution is generally assumed to not be very high, but I can assure you it actually is much higher than you might think. And we are going to hear about our efforts in academic excellence this afternoon in the education area, and we'll hear about the improvements in the administrative infrastructure in the business meeting. And I'm here to give you a vignette of the importance of what we need to do with respect to our research enterprise. So I'll provide a little bit of context nationally because I think it's very important to pay attention to what's going on nationally, and then spend a few minutes on where we are, and then introduce something that I think will have a tremendous possibility for improving our future. So nationally, here's a very interesting set of data. This shows the gross domestic product as a function of time from the fourth quarter of 07 through the third quarter of 011. And you can see, despite this enormous fiscal crisis that took place between those two time periods, which drove our economy down so dramatically, in fact, the economy is measured by the gross domestic product has, in fact, in many ways recovered. But notice the workforce that's doing that. The workforce has, in fact, dramatically contracted. And in fact, it's contracted in some very specific areas, and we have to pay very close attention to those areas. It's essentially a devaluation of the workforce that's taking place to produce that economy. Now, this particular data, again, these data come from the National Bureau of Statistics, shows, for example, the impact of education. And President Riley has stated this in many different ways, but here, in fact, are some very explicit numbers on the importance of what's going on. And you can see if one's looking for a vaccine and inoculation against a trend, that inoculation is, in fact, education. The higher the degree state, the more immune you are from downturns in the economy. And what is that really saying to us? That's a systematic movement to a knowledge-based economy. A workforce that's going to deliver that gross domestic product is going to be a workforce that has an exquisitely important education at the highest possible level. And that's really what we need to get done. And that, in many ways, is going to be baked into our research enterprise. So a few points about the economic impact. You've seen these numbers before. These are the impact of the Madison campus on the economy of the region and the state. And the numbers generally have 10 to the 9th involved in them. Those aren't millions, those are billions of dollars. So the impact of what we do in terms of our research enterprise has a tremendous impact upon the state and the nation, and is critical for us to not just maintain that but grow it. But by the same token, when you consider the three areas of weakness that that the Chancellor so articulately discussed, this can be a major component in driving that recovery. Just to remind you of the curiosity of the Madison campus, this shows our total funding research base as a function of time. And the two key points here is the numbers that indicate third, fourth, second, third, etc., correspond to our productivity vis-a-vis the productivity of all other major research funding institutions in the United States. So here, out of a state of 5.5 million people, roughly, you have an engine of discovery that's been ranked in the top 5 in the nation for the last 25 years. This is an astounding and unusual, almost abnormal effort on the behalf of this institution. But the more important part is those numbers have been going up systematically, and I think we can drive that even further, that further agenda. Point one. Point two, there's two colors. The red color is the federal investment in research. The blue color is the non-federal component. Now, we're going to remain highly competitive on the federal side. Where we have margin to improve ourselves, which will affect our core budget, is actually on the non-federal side. And that, in fact, is what we'll be talking about in a moment. Now, to complement this effort, we don't stand alone. We have two major and significant partners. The first partner is University Research Park. The visionary effort to create the research park is going to grow and be recognized as one of the seminal moments that took place. You can imagine the space, the size, and the complexity of that organization is, in fact, a proving ground for our ability to take discovery into commercialization. And the degree to which we participate in that will be a reflection of the degree to which we can generate additional revenue streams for our core budget. This gives you a flavor of our other partner, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. This gives you some perspective of the magnitude and the visionary of that impact. $1.25 billion in money was returned in terms of research support for this institution since the creation of WARF. That's an enormous resource that's allowed us to leverage ourselves to this position of second, third, and fourth in the nation with respect to our research enterprise. We would not be able to be where we are without the impact of WARF on our efforts. And here's a rather dense slide, but one I'm sure you haven't seen before. And this gives you the growth of the WARF endowment as a function of time, starting only back in 91, 92. But if you go back, you can see WARF has been around since the 30s, so the growth has been simply spectacular, the compounding of that. That, in terms of licensing revenue that comes from the patent disclosures and relicensing in those in the commercial area, returns a tremendous amount to the university, and that's indicated by the red data shown, which are gifts and grants to the UW, which track very closely the gross revenue from their royalty. This is another feeder in our enterprise. So the result of this has been a tremendous increase in the commercialization as a result of. We call these WARF startups. These are companies in which not only did WARF take the position of licensing royalty, but WARF actually was a participant in the commercialization of that. These are just some of the major ones that you might recognize. And notice that this is being driven in an entirely high technology, knowledge-based economy, the impact of this on what we're doing. So what's wrong with this? I've described a picture that you must say, what is this person talking about? How could we possibly be more successful than we've already been? Well, here's a comparison between the University of Wisconsin and the University of Utah. Now, I don't think there's anyone in the room that would say the University of Utah is a comparable institution to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but in fact, if you look at their efforts with respect to disclosures, we swamp them. We triple the number of disclosures going out the door to WARF with respect to our discovery process. Where the problem lies is the commercialization aspect. They're generating as much commercialization as we are with half the disclosures that we are. Okay? That is a golden opportunity that we can pursue. And that has a name. The name for that is discovery to product. And our vision is how do we reach deeper and deeper into our discovery base, those laboratories that are standing throughout campus, and actively pursue the movement of those discoveries that take place into the patent disclosure environment and subsequently into the commercialization environment. Discovery to product is a mechanism to do that. And it's a mechanism that's only going to be, before I tell you the mechanism, this is generally a flow chart of what happens. And presently what generally happens is that the intellectual property that comes out of our scientists and faculty and staff and laboratories is disclosed to WARF, and the most likely outcome of that is patents are filed and obtained and then subsequently relicensed to industry and society. Well, that's not all that could be done. The right arm of this is a mechanism by which the institution, in partnership with WARF, pays much closer attention to direct commercialization. Right? The creation of and implementation of our discovery that are coming out of our laboratories into an environment that will drive a much bigger enterprise for us. These are some of the activities that we're presently doing, but keep in mind that our activities so far, which are rather extensive, are generally not cohesive. They're created to address a specific problem. Improve this, change that, cultivate this. There's no cohesive matrix by which we move through these various assets to a higher degree of commercialization. We can do that by a partnership with Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, in which we work together to actively reach into those laboratories, improve the rate of disclosures, which could easily be accomplished, and then identify amongst that set of disclosures those discoveries that have a particular application that would benefit from a degree of commercialization and actively pursue that. We can't do that as a university. That's not our role. Our role is on the discovery process on the front side. WARF, on the other hand, to a certain degree, does have that role. So in partnership with WARF and focusing on, for example, this set of attributes, we could dramatically increase the yield that comes out of this institution. We have a wonderful opportunity that we probably will never have again, and it would be almost effortless to accomplish this. So we will be spending a considerable amount of effort and time to figure out how to do this. Our investigators and scientists are wickedly creative. They don't necessarily want to become company presidents. They don't necessarily even want to get anywhere near that. They want to stay with the discovery process. Our role will be to cultivate that discovery process in such a means that will increase the yield from our institution in terms of commercialization. Now, this is not rocket science. This is exactly the process that University of Michigan and Stanford University, and to a certain extent Utah, have been actively pursuing with great success. They've done a much more effective job at leveraging their resource to deal with exactly the same problem the Chancellor discussed this morning than we have. And we have an almost unique opportunity to pursue that. So let me come back to the full discussion. The Chancellor pointed out that we have a core budget problem. There are three venues in which we can enhance that core budget. One is to improve our effective and efficiency with respect to our administrative infrastructure, and that will be discussed this afternoon. The other one, my colleagues will discuss the education excellence that we can do. Really a decoupling, if you will, of the traditional academic instruction into a form of instruction that's much more learner-driven, much more flexible, much more agile, and hopefully much more effective. so we can increase our efficiency and effectiveness in the academic area. And the third leg of that stool will, in fact, be a dramatic improvement in our ability to move our discoveries into the marketplace, providing a high impact on the state of Wisconsin and certainly in the region of the country. So I'm sure that Chancellor and I would be delighted to answer any questions that you might have, Michael.
I think that would be great. Why don't you, first of all, thank you very much for that presentation, both of you. Second, why don't we see if the Regents first have any questions or comments that relate to the comments of either David or Paul. Anybody who has anything they want to ask about or say? Judy.
Would you be more specific about what those other universities are doing that this university is not yet accomplished?
Well, let me give you a few vignettes of that. One of the issues is a mechanism by which we take high technology industry and interface that industry with our discovery and educational process. How do we bring those into a more intimate relationship? In that vein, for example, Stanford has probably taken the lead on that. Now, they have a huge advantage. They're sitting in, the capital, if you will, of commercialization in a high-tech technology area. But they've brought a process which, in fact, we have now finally accomplished, namely WID-MIR, where they brought public-private facilities and scientists and researchers into high proximity to each other to enhance that movement of creativity into the marketplace. And that's probably one of the key examples of that. Another activity, for example, has been pursued by University of Michigan, and that's an what do we lack institutionally, if you will, in the greater southern Wisconsin area? Frankly, what we lack are serial entrepreneurs, people who have brought to commercial success an idea, a creative aspect, and then done it again and again and again. Those individuals are key to this kind of success. We just simply have a paucity of that resource in our area. Michigan does also, and they've put a serious effort into the education and training of those individuals. So there's two typical examples.
Anybody else? Mark.
I was just curious that the technologies or things that are developed, I heard commercialization and licensing. Does the university typically retain ownership of the patents or the IP, or is that shared in a joint ownership, or is that sold outright? And how does that impact an organization's willingness to contribute?
Okay, a 30-second short course in IP. At our institution, the intellectual property is in fact owned by the faculty and staff, not by the university. As a result of the Bayh-Dole process, by law, all federally funded research that creates intellectual property, we assign, the faculty and staff assign that intellectual property to the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. They take ownership of the IP at that point. They subsequently commercially license it, and from the funding stream of the royalties associated with that licensing, a component goes back to the investigators. The remainder goes in to build the endowment, if you will, of WARF, and a component of that, a very significant component of that, comes back to the institution in an annualized process. So there's a clear feedback between licensing revenue and the support of our infrastructure. Does that give you a pretty good idea?
That's one of the great innovations in the history of the United States.
What? Well, they just go on and on. I mean,
the original idea.
Vitamin D, for example. In the medical diagnostic area, virtually everyone in this room will at some point in their life experience one or more medical procedures that are entirely based on intellectual property created by this institution.
Okay. Anybody else? Any of the chancellors want to add anything? Again, thank you very much, gentlemen. Higher education systems, like ours, like so many entities, normally survive at a high level only through adaptation to changing circumstances. Our system is not exempt from that time-tested truism, and it is with that in mind that we continue today our discussions on the evolving roles and responsibilities of our board, to remind us of our changing landscape, that to which we must adapt, what adaptations we have already made, and an overview of what's in the works. I go back to President Riley.
Thank you again, Regent Spector. I think we all recognize that change is not just a Wisconsin phenomenon. Indeed, as David Ward indicated, instead that broader national landscape of higher education is changing, evolving, and we're part of that evolution. The current economic climate is clearly presenting public colleges and universities with challenges that we just cannot ignore or set aside without compromising its reach and the quality of what we do. As in other states, our challenges here include continued declines in state funding. The 2011-13 state budget reduced taxpayer support for the UW system by $250 million over 2 years, including specific requirements to make major reductions in system administration offices. State funding was reduced by another $90 million, $45.3 million per year to reflect higher employee contributions to retirement and health insurance benefits. That results in a total impact on the UW system of over $340 million. The proposed lapse calls for UW system to prepare for the loss of $65.6 million more over 2 years. At the same time, the UW system has been given unprecedented new operational flexibilities. That's the good news. These flexibilities are not everything we asked for in the Wisconsin Idea Partnership, but they represent a good step in the right direction. Let me see if I can put these up on the screen for us. There we are. Just let me run through these quickly with you to remind you of them and for our new regents to let them know. One area where we did achieve some flexibility is in budgeting, the ability to reallocate savings from one area in our budgets to another, using all or almost all the available financial resources to address our educational needs. Big improvement, and we're working through now exactly how we'll implement all that. In financial management, the authority to manage our own revenues and retain interest earnings. In the past, for instance, the interest on the tuition pool for the university was swept off the top and put into the general fund for the state. That will no longer occur. In terms of personnel systems, the freedom to develop new personnel systems, one for UW-Madison and another for other institutions, a big forward step here, I think. Chancellor Ward alluded to the differences between many of our positions and those of state agencies. This is true of universities and state agencies across the country. So we're very excited at the opportunity to really craft two new personnel systems which will fit our needs much more efficiently than the one we have labored in for years. In purchasing, the ability to enter into contracts for materials, supplies, equipments, or services that relate to higher education. In that flexibility, we have the ability to do that for supplies, services that are unique to higher education. In the other areas where we are purchasing something that's not unique to higher education, we will still be part of the state purchasing pool. In tuition, the authority to increase resident undergraduate tuition without restriction, subject to a 2-year 5.5% cap on tuition increases. Let me say that again, because there's a contradiction in terms embedded there. The authority we receive to increase resident undergraduate tuition without restriction, subject to a 2-year 5.5% cap on tuition increases. So in this biennium, we cannot increase tuition and will not, have not in the first year beyond the 5.5%. The way the law is written after this biennium, those restrictions would come off. Now, I want to hasten to add that we are very, very conscious of using that responsibility very responsibly, and that tuition increases are not going to fund the majority of what we do in the future in a way that some people have criticized higher education for trying to do. These authorities, the flexibilities that we got, I think we're all mindful, can be taken away just as quickly as they were granted. So part of what we're trying to do now in the first year of having them is exercise them very, very responsibly, so we're demonstrating to the people of Wisconsin that we know how to use them in a way that is responsible, that meets the needs and the desires that the people of Wisconsin have of this university system. In construction, we have the authority now to manage building projects that cost less than $500,000 that are entirely funded with gifts and grants without approval by the State Building Commission. That finally, I see the chair of the Capital Planning Committee and the board is chuckling a bit. That finally is pretty narrow flexibility because most buildings, most projects cost more than $500,000 and many of them are still not entirely funded with gifts and grants. So that's one we need to work more on. But again, it's a first step, we hope, toward further flexibilities, which we will continue to talk to the state about in the coming biennium. Well, as presented in my response to the President's Advisory Committee on the roles of UW system administration, which we discussed with this board in September, I've identified a number of big strategic changes we must make in order to take full advantage of these newfound freedoms and reshape the relationship between UW system administration and the UW institutions. These include new ways to involve our chancellors in developing system-wide policies from the ground up by, for instance, having 3 chancellors serve on my cabinet, 2 other chancellors meet with us on a regular basis with the board leadership, the president and vice president. The system administration as a whole is implementing a new management philosophy that calls for more consultation earlier on, more local control. We have devolved, for instance, recently a number of personnel abilities to the chancellors in terms of appointments, in terms of salary decisions for their staffs, in terms of contracting authority. We are currently, at this board's urging, doing a review of all region policies and trying then to eliminate the ones that are out of date, change ones that impose excessive authority over the campuses, find ways to take that and again push it out to our institutional leadership. In September, the conversation we had about all this focused on 3 major areas where we are moving responsibility and accountability out to the institutions while we work smarter, we hope, at UW system administration to connect the resources of the entire UW system to the needs of the state. First, I called for restructuring the process for approving new degree programs, leaving the responsibility for academic quality with our UW institutions, their faculty members, provosts, their accrediting agencies. In this model, UW system and the Board of Regents would focus on the state's array of degree program options and the relationship of proposals for new programs to the institution's academic plans and to market need. Second, we discussed our move to refocus UW System's auditing resources on work that relates to overseeing board policies and fiduciary responsibilities while delegating to the institutions more local responsibility for programmatic reviews. And third, we talked in September, too, about a more targeted approach to UW's investment in economic development through a new partnership with Wisconsin's new Economic Development Corporation, a.k.a. formerly the Department of Commerce. That partnership focused on job creation and new industry sustainability. What can we do as a university system working with that entity to increase the number of jobs in the state that are sustainable and help to create the new industries that will house those jobs now and in the future. The guiding premise of all this is to transform the UW system in ways that are substantive and intentional and visionary. Together, we're working to encourage the evolution of this system to be more effective, more efficient, more nimble, more innovative, more entrepreneurial. I think only then will we fulfill our potential and our promise to help build a stronger Wisconsin that benefits all. As we've said before, this is just the beginning of a long-term change process, change at system administration, change at the institutions. We're breaking some molds of the way people behaved in the 2 entities and the way they relate to each other, and that's what we need to do. So moving forward, the Regents and the UW system staff will be refocusing our priorities, and we'll be asking chancellors and our many other colleagues across the 15 UW institutions to do the same, and we will keep you posted and keep you involved in that process. And today really is the beginning of a pretty significant involvement in thinking about that process. So with that, I'll turn the microphone back over to Regent Spector for a few comments and then to introduce our distinguished guest.
Thank you, Kevin. We are indeed navigating uncharted waters as we respond to rapidly changing circumstances, both external and internal. As part of that navigation, we have begun consideration of which aspects of our role and responsibilities might change and which will not change. Our first step in that process was the creation of 2 ad hoc committees, one focused on Regent roles and responsibilities and the other on structure and governance. While the timing of the latter committee is likely to coincide with that of the Legislative Task Force chaired by Regent Falbo, which he will report to us a little bit later, I am hopeful that we will focus on recommendations from the Roles and Responsibilities Committee at our February meeting. To better inform that focus, we need facts, context, and other pre-decision information. With that purpose in mind, we have invited Dr. Terry MacTaggart, a nationally recognized expert on such things, to share his knowledge and experience. Terry served as the facilitator for President Raleigh's Advisory Committee on the Roles of UW System Administration, to which he alluded earlier. He is a former Chancellor of UW Superior in our system and a former CEO of 2 other public university systems, the Minnesota State University System and the University of Maine System. Terry, by the way, we do not want you to be intimidated by UW-Madison's Rose Bowl date. The University of Maine Black Bears, we have learned, coming off a resounding upset win over Appalachian State last weekend, has advanced to the NCAA Football Championship subdivision quarterfinals this weekend against Georgia Southern. And I will tell you, Terry, that I was encouraged to include that at the request of David Giroux, a very proud graduate of the University of Maine. Terry's research and publications focus on higher education system governance, improving relations between such institutions and the public, and restoring institutional vitality. Calling upon his own personal experiences and his work with the President's Advisory Committee, we've invited Terry to join us today to speak with us about Regent responsibilities and leadership roles in a time of change. I have asked Terry to provide comparative and other information that will help our ultimate decision-making and to avoid, at this time, any conclusory recommendations or discussion on what those decisions should be. So please join me in welcoming Terry MacTaggart.
Good morning, all. Good morning, Regent President. Thank you for that reference to the football team. Go Badgers, go Black Bears. This is great. I'm pleased as punch to be here. It's a gorgeous day in Madison. Remarkable facility that's kind of emblematic of the great university and its students that put it together. My former colleague chancellors, one of the remarkable things I can say about this system as an outsider is you'd be hard-pressed to find a system in which the comprehensive universities are as high quality across the board as they are in Wisconsin. Everyone knows about the magnificence of Madison, but on a broader level, the kind of work that these folks and their faculty and staff do is just remarkable. Regent Pruitt and I have had a debate over whether this system is the best or one of the best in the country, but suffice it to say there aren't many that rise above it. My job is pretty straightforward. Let me just kind of cut to the chase quickly in whatever time we have today. And that is to engage all of you in a discussion about what it means to make a difference as a regent in bringing positive change to this system. And it's kind of appropriate that David Ward and his colleague outlined the, a comprehensive approach to what might change. We're going to zero in quite a bit more here, and how could a new regent, how could a veteran regent really make a difference, move the needle for the University of Wisconsin system and frankly, for the state of Wisconsin. I thought David's presentation underscored the point that if the system moves forward, the state moves forward, and if the system doesn't, the state doesn't either. Let me refer to some things in your packet. You'll see a workshop materials list. There's actually two sets there. The first set we'll touch on from time to time in this conversation. The second is just kind of background reading. If it does anything for you, fine. If it doesn't, that's fine too. Let's set up here. Okay. Let me underscore the three questions, and I'd kind of like to conduct this sort of a sandwich. I'll say a little bit about each question, provide a little context, refer to something in those notes, and then I'll shut up, and I'll look forward to your questions, your criticism. You don't have to buy what I'm saying, your comments, your thoughts. I'd like to underscore what President Spector had to say about this being a very upstream discussion. Your two committees and your subsequent debates and things you hear going forward will narrow it down to some specific actions and changes that you'll probably want to make. Winning this morning, for me at least, and I hope for you, is to come out of here with better questions, tougher questions, drilling deeper as you go forward. The three questions, and I apologize to people in the audience, but we'll leave this up here so that if anybody wants to note it, they can. First, what does it mean to be a high-performing board today? Not whether it's of a small liberal arts college, of a massive system, or a large system at least like this one, or something in between. It won't take us long to suggest that. Okay, and then exactly how do you assert leadership? 180,000 plus students. How do you assert leadership that's going to improve the quality of their experience, their ability to pursue a career, to be great citizens of this state, without micromanaging the place or pushing your hobby horse ideas that make a lot of sense to you but might not necessarily be good policy? A couple of ideas there. And then just some thoughts on how you align your understanding of your roles and responsibilities, written in Chapter 38, enshrined since the days that I was here sitting over with the chancellors representing UWS. How has that got to change if you're really going to make a difference, move the needle, change the trajectory in this state? So those are the kind of three questions that after talking with Regent President I thought we might pursue. And it was my best effort to put myself in your shoes and say, what would I want to know at this stage of the game? We'll see a little bit later if I've scored there or not. I actually practiced with this thing with a banana in my room in the morning, but I didn't have this coat on, so permit me to take it off so I could be a little more relaxed here. I use this triangle to kind of illustrate the growth and change in responsibility for boards of trustees that has really emerged, I'd say, in the last 10 years or so. And the triangle is to illustrate that the kind of base foundation role of boards is fiduciary. You screw that up, and there's no matter how much good you do elsewhere, if the people of the state lose confidence in your oversight of the finances, making correct budget decisions, a fair allocation of resources, all the things that you now have more authority to oversee, as the President pointed out, then anything else you do isn't going to matter much. That'll be the story of the day. I would add to that something that has always been implicit in the work of boards, but now, after Penn State, has become much more explicit, and that is the protection and advancing of the brand, the reputation. Do you know, for example, do you have polling results, do you have scientific, social science, research-based understanding of what the people of Wisconsin think about you? I don't mean the institutions. I think they're pretty strong fans of the work that the faculty and staff do. But what about the board and the system administration? One of the questions I'll ask you to think about later is moving from your sort of intuitive understanding of that to how you'd like to be regarded in the minds of the people. So it's not just managing their resources, student tuition, federal grants, and all of that. It's managing the reputation of the system, and I would say the board itself. So every board should be attentive to this kind of thing. If you stop there, it's not all bad, but it sure ain't great. Okay. The next level is to develop a culture of to summarize, I put up here as dissent and agreement. I won't spell this out, but I'll just sort of ask a rhetorical question. Do any of you know what the term PITA, P-I-T-A, stands for? I'll leave that to your imagination or a private conversation later. But if you don't have someone who asks tough questions, who's a contrarian, who challenges conventional wisdom, who thinks differently, maybe in many cases it's often the newcomers on the board who play this role, you should name one. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Most boards today, and if you read just a wonderful author named Richard Shake, who's sort of, provided this sort of overall concept for this, there's a tendency to stop here. Okay, we want robust conversations well before a decision is made, keeps us from making mistakes, gets buy-in, develop better ideas. I don't think it's enough. The one I would add to it, and this is the sort of new expectation of the last decade and become much more intense, I think, in the last 3 years, is to play a role in change leadership. Not just to preside over this large system, but to figure out a way that you can apply your brain power and your governing authority to helping this place move forward. That's not a re-centralization of the trend, as the President pointed out. It seems to me you're moving steadily to a more devolved, decentralized model. But even more acutely now, the question becomes, well, what do you guys do? And how can you add value to this process? You worked hard to get here. Is there a more distinguished board in the state? I'm not aware of one. What can you do to make a difference? Hopefully we'll have a better understanding of the answers to that question by the end of our conversation. Any comments, questions, disputes, queries about this kind of framework? Do you buy it? Do you find it intriguing? Anything on that before we go? What are some ways to make this happen, and what are some ways not to make it happen, the change leadership part?
I think it's very helpful.
Appreciate that. Judy, does that work for you? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand what change leadership.
Bingo. Great question. I hope I have part of the answer at least in the next few minutes. Okay. Okay, got it. Actually, the thing I'd like to go to next is a document in your handout, and it's entitled How Boards Contribute to Change and How They Don't. Okay. Looks like this.
Is it one page, Terry?
It's one page. It should be in your folder. I pirated one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's right behind the document that has the title.
Title page?
Yeah, yeah. Second page, actually. Got it? Okay, thank you. A mantra on this business lately has been the engaged board. Every president, every head of a university wants a board that's at least they say they want a board that's more engaged with the workings of the institution. Some of them say to me, Terry, I've got them right where I want them now, and they're plenty engaged. Thank you. But I think it's probably generally felt in the business that the more the board is intelligently involved in the working of the institution, the better long-term strategies will come out of it. In some cases, a higher level of giving and so on. One way to think about that, one answer to Judy's question, I think, is to draw a distinction between your the results of your experience and your training, your intelligence, your brain power, your success and your experience in business or government or the social sector or other forms of advanced education, that role, and the role as the ultimate authority within the UW system, okay, your governing authority. I think if you bring both of those things to the table, that's one way to impact change. Several of you, four of the regents served on the advisory committee to the president. That was the brain power part. Okay, you could have skipped all of that and just kind of cut to the conclusion that you were going to try to create a more entrepreneurial, a more innovative, decentralized system, but you didn't. The president pulled together a large group of people, including a former regent, as a matter of fact, Jay Smith, to say, let's think about this. What's the right way to do it? That's the brain power example. Let me give you another one, not from Wisconsin. It's Maryland, which, frankly, I believe the board there, in concert with their brilliant system head, Britt Kerwin, has done more to reform itself and the operations of the system than perhaps any in the country. Okay, just to be blunt about it. And if you wanted to take a look at some other places to see what lessons you might extract for your own purposes, you could do a lot worse than talking to your colleagues in Maryland. What happened there, one of the many things that happened there, is the chair of the board in that case realized there was a deteriorating relationship with the legislature. It had been kind of rocky off and on, a little bit different than Wisconsin, I'd say, but the reputation of the system became one, it was just too expensive, too slow moving, not responsive to the needs of the state. Familiar? Anyway. And the regent president in that case said, we've really got to change the game. We've got to make dramatic changes in things like that are, kind of the third rail in parts of higher education, teaching loads, tuition increases. We've got to be able to educate more students without getting additional resources from the legislature in measurable ways that objective critics would say, you're not just giving us anecdotes, you're not just blowing smoke, this is the real deal. They pulled it off. They pulled it off. My point to you is that it was the board, and particularly its chair in this case, frankly, that stepped up to the plate and then worked with an extremely able chief executive to bring about those changes. But the core thing was not so much their governing authority, that was there to be sure, was their political savvy. They realized that the usual arguments to the legislature weren't going to work anymore. And as it happens, the board chair at the time was a developer, and he knew both the business side and the political side. And
I thought he might have been a very good lawyer.
No doubt he wishes he was, and he may have been that too as well. So that's one side of the equation. The second is to assert your governing authority. And let me give another example there. This not from a system, but from actually a private institution in Pennsylvania called Widener University. It's got a couple of branch campuses, but it's not a system by any stretch. There, the board played a key role again. Widener happens to be located in Chester, Pennsylvania, and I understand that there are about 400 school districts in Pennsylvania, and some state agency ranked them in quality. And the 400th, and that wasn't a good number to have, was Chester. It was a devastated community that had been left behind in the post-industrial changes in our country. And the biggest reason that people didn't attend Widener was Chester, was the location. For years, the institution had ignored its neighborhood. They want to be regarded as kind of a prestigious institution, not associated with a bleak urban environment. And the board had the good insight to say, no, we've got to embrace our neighborhood. We can't keep turning our backs on them. They hired a president to do that for them, to carry out that kind of responsibility. And I have to confess, I find some parallels here with Kevin and his growth agenda for Wisconsin. I've talked to some of the regents about how that started and so on. But Wisconsin, the university system never turned its back on the state by any stretch. But there was certainly, that was a move to re-engage at a deeper level with the primary needs of the state, economic in particular. Well, the board at this other school had the same idea. About 2 years in, a delegation of faculty members came to the board and said, we're kind of losing confidence in this guy. We're not buying the civic engagement stuff. It's not academic enough. It's not what we were trained to do. And the vice chair of the board responded to the delegation, we've got confidence in the president. Okay. The changes that I think lie before you are going to create pushback as sure as night follows day. And there's going to be times, not just with the president, frankly, but with your chancellors here, and I see some heads nodding there, as you engage in this stuff, they're going to need your backing all the way, because they're not going to be able to pull off the dramatic changes required without making some people unhappy. And one way or another, either via their legislators or directly to you or in the media, there'll be some pushback. Okay. And that's where the board steps up to the plate and asserts its governing authority. It says, now, we've got confidence in these changes. We've got confidence in these people. We're going to stand behind them and help to make it happen. Now, I'm going to pause here in a minute. I promised a conversation. Where do the screw-ups occur? It's in confusing the two ideas. Mistaking your governing, your intellectual capital, your good ideas for your governing authority. I won't give an example there because I think the point is well enough made. But if you're tempted to say, well, I think this is the solution. We are the best kept secret in the world. What we need is more marketing. Well, that might be true, but that's your contribution of an idea. It's not the assertion of your governing authority in bringing about a new change of things. Let me pause there. Questions, criticisms? Do you buy it? Is it helpful, Judy, in distinguishing how you make a difference as regents?
I'm still thinking.
Okay.
Right now, we're just talking about basically a board, not how we've changed with the new flexibilities and such. I think that's where I know you're coming to, but I think that's where kind of led to this is, okay, we have some idea what we were supposed to be doing in the past. I don't know if you probably would help with that, but especially in the new environment. That word.
This is tricky, and I think what I'm asking you to think about, and I probably didn't make it explicit before, is as I was preparing for this, I've worked with about 17 systems, and I focused on 6 of them that had gone through major change. Now, in most cases, they went through something you went through, 40 or more years ago. They were a merger of pre-existing systems or institutions, and a new board got created. It's happening right now in Connecticut, where they've merged the community college and comprehensive universities. It happened, 8-9 years ago in Minnesota, where they merged the technical colleges, the community colleges, and the comprehensives. They started with a new board so they could begin to fashion new policies, new approach. They had a new agenda, goals partly articulated by the state. You don't. This is about changing yourselves. This isn't the new members at the table are joining this great legacy group here. It's not like they're all new members at the table and you say, how do we want to put this machine together for the first time? So I think, and what I'm proposing, Regent Smith, is that you think about changing the way you operate more fundamentally than just our responsibilities have shifted a bit.
I think that we have operated in this way to a certain extent. We've certainly tried to give thought help to Kevin in things he does, or encouraged him and his leadership group to do so. But I think this gives it a much more stark conceptual distinction, which is very helpful for us to think about.
If I could underscore, I interviewed Regent Bradley and others around a book that I did on the growth agenda for Wisconsin. That to me was kind of an ideal example of applying brain power with your executive authority to bring out something good. I'll come back to that in a different way later. Judy.
I think I can articulate a little better what my struggle is. My commitment is not to change. It is to improvement. And I I get hung up on saying that that is our commitment.
You know, I think we may have had that discussion during the advisory committee. Yeah, it sounded a little familiar. I use the word change partly because it's more dramatic. And it responds, you know, we're all in this wonderful situation. Do we change incrementally, just maybe at a faster rate than we used to? Or do you kind of jumpstart it and do something more dramatic? Well, no one's figured out what that more dramatic thing is yet. But there are people that argue the times won't let us just make these sort of marginal adjustments. So
I didn't mean my remark to sound as if I was supporting marginal.
No. Friends were sort of replaying a dialogue we had a couple months ago. But as I say, I use the word change because I'd rather get people's attention. Yeah, and to send a message to the audiences that think that these institutions rooted in the Middle Ages haven't been that quick to change. Okay. Any other
comments or questions for Terry at this point? Well, why don't you keep going?
Okay. As a practical matter, and there's another illustration of something like this in your handout, I think you're going to need to shift the answer to the question of who does what now and who's going to do what going forward between the regents and the president. And on your handout, I did another one that we won't discuss between the president and the chancellors. And I'm going to ask for a couple of suggestions in filling in the blanks. But imagine decisions that you make in which the regent's pretty well dominated. It's not unilateral. You listen to Kevin, you listen to the chancellors, you listen to others, but it's pretty much in your court to make the decision. Then there are some where you and the president work very closely together. Okay? There are some that are pretty much in the domain of the president. You might be informed, but you don't need to know about. And there's some where neither one of you are particularly involved. Is that reasonably clear? Yeah. Then what I'd ask you to think about, and just suggest, no one's going to be held to this. We're at the front end of discussion that will conclude, I assume, 4 or 5 months. But I'd like you to think of just some examples that might fall into particularly these three. What are some, well, let's begin over here. What are some examples of things you just do pretty much as a board, and you don't need to consult with too many people before you do it? You select the president. Well, Jeff, that's actually your own president, you mean? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great, your own officers, you name your committees, you control your own operations. That's sort of a classic example. Thank you. What about things that you feel, particularly going forward into this new world where improvement or change is the order of the day, where you're going to need to be working closely with your executive president? What things come to mind there? Or Kevin, for example, if you would want to comment on that. I know one of the questions that the Regent president put in his charge to the two committees under the advocacy heading is, should we be deeply engaged in that? What does that mean? Or should we be more neutral and objective, if you will? That may bear on this. The students have any perspective on this one? Mark.
What comes to my mind in that upper right-hand corner is right out of state statutes, and that is to determine the higher education needs of the state.
Absolutely. Yeah. That a joint enterprise, not, excuse me, Regent Whitburn.
Allocation of capital. Resources tight, likely to be tight, or perhaps even in the 10th grade.
Are you comfortable at this point putting a bullet or two under that statement, or is that something you still want to reflect on? How much detail you think the board should have in allocating, setting priorities, really, in allocating resources?
I'm an hour
Fair enough. It doesn't seem that way if you with that answer. Okay. Any other comments on this? Maybe particularly from the veterans certainly have a perspective on the change, but maybe from other new regents. Thinking about your own corporate backgrounds, how you interact with CEOs, or if you are the CEO, how you'd like your board to interact with you.
Well, I think you said the public advocacy role is going to be one that we haven't had, I would suggest, in the last, being here for 7 years or so, that we haven't had a great role in. And I think that's going to be potentially changing.
Okay. Any other comments on the changes in the advocacy role, either what it might mean going forward, how you work with the president, or for that matter, the chancellors on it? Tim?
You know, we're not supposed to talk for 3 years. You realize? but you know, having had that caveat and the fact that I do not want to be a PETA. I mean, just in theory, we're in a situation right now where we're dealing with disinvestment in higher education, not just here in Wisconsin, but around the country. There are two diverse ways we as a board could decide that our institution is going to deal with that. We could say, we're going to wring our hands and say, my heavens, there's going to be no progress, no change here until we get the money to do it. Or we could say, we've got to empower our institutions to come up with creative ways to work with the money we've got to accomplish what change we can. And I think that President Riley and the chancellors have obviously taken an indication from the board already in that area. But that's the kind of governing decision I think that we would be making here.
I think that expression of that sort of fork in the road is very well put. Yeah, Kevin.
We had the governor sign a bill this week that will make the selection of regents in the future regionally based. One thought that I had on that advocacy box and what the changing role of this board might be given that is I think the success we've had in advocacy in the past really has, and continue to have, really has been based on third parties who have spoken for us, and they've been folks that the chancellors, by and large, have pulled in from their regions. We're now going to have a board that sees itself more regionally conscious, perhaps, than we have been in the past. How do we more effectively use the board then with those local third-party advocates and the chancellors all around the state now that we have a kind of regional conceptual framework for this board that we really didn't have before?
Okay. Regent Pruitt.
I mean, and I don't know how this relates to the boxes, although I think it does. I mean, it seems to me that the evolution, the combination of sort of the evolution and sort of what our role is in part connected to sort of the shifting sands that we're having of moving from a board that sort of was asking the question, how you do it. Micromanaging potentially a little too much, a little more focused on process, to a board that asks, how are you doing? And that is much more related to accountability, outcome-based sort of activities on the campus level and otherwise. And I suspect that one of the things, as I was reflecting on this a little bit, is that may mean a much greater focus on this board for things like our annual accountability report. That is really a measure in a very real terms of how you do it. And I think maybe over the years I have noticed that we pay more or less attention as a board to that. And I suspect that going forward we need to pay a whole lot more attention to that because as we devolve, we also need to hold accountable.
Well put. Let's stick with the advocacy thing for a few minutes, and then maybe also, if I could, Chuck, circle back to the point you just made. Is advocacy just jawboning the legislature? is it putting together, as some states have, a kind of a coalition, some people call it a caucus, with the university chancellors and their local business, civic, and political leaders that are, in this extraordinarily difficult time, look after to the best they can, the funding and the operational independence. Does it also involve, and again, these are things that have done elsewhere, it doesn't mean you have to do it here at the end of the day. This is part of the outcome of the committee work that your president has indicated. Do you also need to put together a campaign? Do you need to breathe some fresh life into the growth agenda for Wisconsin? My good buddy Ames McGinnis addressed the legislative committee yesterday, and his way of putting it was, what? What's the purpose in all of this? Devolution for its own sake may not be a bad idea. Streamlining may not be a bad idea. But if it doesn't advance Wisconsin, the people in it, get them an education, create a job, help a business grow, why? And that's, I think part of the advocacy piece, I think, is not just old-fashioned lobbying. I was a registered lobbyist in Wisconsin. We spent a lot of time driving down from Superior. But I believe it calls for, frankly, a more comprehensive and sophisticated approach to the game, because it's just gotten a lot tougher. Because the resources aren't there. Yes, Regent Spector.
I would just throw out as a suggestion, I don't know that we would want to agree on this later, but that in this particular time we're in, I put together two of the things you talked about. If, in fact, the Board of Regents as a board rather than individuals, the analogous to a court of some kind, has prestige in the state, and I think it does. I think it is a prestigious, you referred to it as a kind of prestigious board among boards. I think it is. And if the public does feel that way, then I think one could argue that it's incumbent on the then current members to be advocates in areas that it's right for them to be advocates in. And one that comes to mind to me right now is this change in culture that we've been talking about. I don't think that's particularly within the academic role of the university or the professorate or the expertise of only some. I think we have expertise in that from our life experiences, our businesses, whatever. And I think if we speak to the public, whether it be at Rotary meetings or to editorial boards of newspapers or whatever it might be, as members of this board, if the public does respect us, I think that's something we should think about. Doing more than we've done to, in this transitional time, taking a message out there of what we're asking our leadership to think about and do and translate to the chancellors and use those words, entrepreneurial and nimble, that they're the almost cliches. But I think they're things the public wants to hear.
Just the fact of your speaking out at a higher decibel or more often or more broadly would send a message in and of itself about how seriously you take this.
Well, I suggest it might be helpful. I don't know if it would or not.
Would you like to entertain other discussion of that before I turn to Regent Falbo? Or perhaps it's on that topic?
talking about decentralization. It doesn't stop if we're successful at decentralizing. It starts there, and then it's, and maybe the regionalization of appointments is part of this, although I think we're regionalized anyway. And then it's how can we best help each chancellor in each and every campus, and how can they call on us to support their goals, so that we have to become a bit more decentralized as we're asking them to. We have to become more involved in ways that they want us to be. And we have to get to those campuses and get to that level to give all the support we possibly can.
I don't think there's any question, but their jobs have gotten more challenging, and the additional thoughtful support you can provide would be pretty welcome. Other comments on this, and I want to circle back to Chuck's point. Kevin?
Let me try to link the advocacy discussion to Regent Pruitt's issue of accountability to your suggestion of is it time for a fresh campaign to breathe new life into the growth agenda. Also in this budget bill, we were given, for the first time in the history of the University of Wisconsin, a set of performance indicators by the state that we have now been asked to demonstrate how we're doing on. There were 8 general areas with a lot of sub-indicators under them. It seems to me we ought to make much of that as we think about accountability, as we think about a new campaign for the growth agenda. That is, are we at a point where the board can embrace, and the Chancellor's a notion that says, look, we've been given these new indicators. Some of them we've been reporting on, or like the ones we've been reporting on in our accountability report, but now we know what the people of the state through their elected representatives are saying they're really interested in having the university do and be. And we're going to do our very best on each of these indicators. Let us tell you how we're thinking about them, how we're forming them up, and that's an area where I think the board ought to be involved with us, with the chancellors and I, very intimately, and then maybe set some goals on those performance indicators that says, if we do this, we need some fresh investment for the growth agenda to do more for you. What about that idea, thinking of advocacy and board roles and relationships with the state and investment?
Let me just add one note before I return to Regent Pruitt's, or something is triggered by that. The new criteria, if you will, for chancellors, whether you're hiring them, renewing them, talking with them, is something that, looking at Rick over here and Tom and Debbie, we talked about more than a little during that conversation. And I just, based on the kind of process changes that Kevin described a few minutes ago, I know they and their colleague chancellors will be part of this conversation about how you can legitimately work in partnership without giving up your responsibilities for accountability, monitoring results, and so on. I looked through the agenda today and the last couple of days, and it looked to me like 75% maybe of the work of the attention that you're giving are to negotiations, duels, ELS, with the Department of Administration, with the conversations with the legislature. I mean, it seems to me, I say in the notes somewhere, that the system goes way beyond Van Nuys. It goes to the other end of the street and across Wisconsin as well. But an awful lot of your work seems to be bound up with negotiations, trying to work through certainly the major issue of the lapses that you're struggling with now. And not so much on where you want to be down the road. Now, is the growth agenda, for example, on the table for this meeting? It may have been, and I missed it. It may be in a committee report. And so I'm just sort of putting that up there, Chuck, as you think about aligning your work with where you want to go. Part of that has to be, I think, shifting the attention. Not to say that you can ignore, how to deal with the proposed lapse, for example, by any stretch. But find a way to deal with that that doesn't occupy so much of your thinking, so you're having less time and energy to give to the what. Where do we want to be? How do we want to move the needle in Wisconsin? Any reactions? to that. Any comments, questions?
Is the implication of your comment, Terry, that we should consider a separate long-range planning, strategic planning type committee that on a regular basis is examining where we've been and where we want to go?
That certainly would be one approach, and you personally and your predecessors haven't been shy about naming either ad hoc or longer-term committees as the need arises. Maybe some consideration by the whole board on this alignment question, so that you're not always, God knows, you got to fight those battles. There's no question about that with advocacy and all the intelligence you can apply. But if that's all you're doing, I think the spiral ain't going in the right direction. This has to be about revitalizing the state of Wisconsin through all the things that your colleagues from Madison and the chancellors could talk about in the next few months. And I mentioned earlier in a conversation with Regent Smith, breaking the mold is the hardest thing to do, breaking those old habits. Anything you'd like the president to just take on himself that you can back away from, coming back again to Chuck's point? Is any illustrations, again, not decisions here today, about things that you are now heavily involved in that maybe you just want to pass off to your president with a periodic terse report? Regent Falbo, what was that? And Regent Whitburn, the question you brought up earlier of allocation, budget priorities, and so on, somewhere in there I think you'll want to have a dialogue about where does the role of the Regent stop. It's a significant one, obviously, as part of your fundamental fiduciary responsibility, but where does it stop? And you let your president and his capable staff take it from there. Yes, sir.
I think Chuck nailed it.
Jerry, could you get a little closer to the microphone?
I think Chuck really nailed it in this environment that we're in around this word accountability. As we have greater openness, ever-evolving, greater transparency, the margin for error, whether it be on the fiduciary side or elsewhere, in an organization where the expectation is extremely high across our stakeholders, the margin of error is very narrow. And so, as Chuck was arguing earlier, I think our expectations around the table need to be high, with an understanding at the President's desk and across the Chancellor's that appropriate performance has got to be the lay of the land.
The world has changed from the time when vignettes and anecdotes were sufficient. I don't know of any board in the country, certainly none that I work with, that don't have the M-word metrics out there. And the trick is not to have too many and to pick the right ones and preferably not duplicate the ones that are there already. But as a kind of a shorthand to accountability or an early warning sign things aren't going right, that is certainly the watchword of the day. Yeah.
I just want to just briefly sort of align myself with what where I think Kevin in part was going here also, of, some sort of cohesion and coherence between goals, measurements, accountability standards, and outcomes, not only internal but external. I mean, I think that the linkage between that and whatever an advocacy role that this board can play going forward with our partners at the other end of the street, as well as with people across the state, to say these are the goals, this is how we're measuring, and if we achieve them, we would hope that there would be additional outcomes that would occur that would enable us to include possibly the issue of reinvestment in higher education in the state and other kinds of things. I mean, I think that's a paradigm that has some potential.
I couldn't agree more. Separating old-fashioned lobbying from the core improvement is, I think, a recipe for failure. Pulling it all together, at least you have a fighting chance. Judy.
I wanted to comment on your observation about our agendas and what we're dealing with at this particular meeting, and then thinking about Mike's suggestion of a long-range planning process and committee. And I think that one of our challenges is to do this as an entire board, as well as obviously with appropriate input from people who've done some specific kind of thinking on it. And a number of years ago, we changed from a monthly meeting, a monthly 2-day meeting, to an abbreviated kind of a schedule. And there were good reasons for that, and in many ways, that has helped certain things. But I think that this is the kind of conversation that needs an entire board to be together for some substantial time. Continue.
Fair enough. Region President, should I just run through some things and then tie this up in the next 5 minutes or so? You've got some other things to do, or?
I would say 10 more minutes would be fine.
Okay. Any other comments then on this particular thing before I tee up some other ideas and get your initial reactions, ideas too? Yeah. Troy, thank you.
Wouldn't it be fair to say, looking at the quadrants there, the lower right quadrant, high president, low board, with right accountability, I mean, wouldn't we want as many of the decisions in that area to free up this board, again, with accountability, to do other tasks?
It's not that you don't work hard and you haven't got a full agenda, so I guess I'm kind of agreeing with you. It's what you do during the time and what you can devolve to the president. Kevin, any reactions to that comment?
I think I would agree, and I think it's about the what. We have to agree on what the what is, and then you parcel out who does each piece of getting toward the what in a way that form follows function. And part of this too is just the comfort level of the current leadership of the board and the current membership of the board, and that changes every year to some extent or another, and has to be renegotiated through on a pretty regular basis. But if you're explicit about the what, about who's going to do what pieces of the what, that's the way I think we can all be most effective and stay out of trouble with each other and the wider public.
I would just add one quick thing. My experience with public boards over longer than I want to remember is that I have found it sensible to err on the side of the board knowing more than less. If you want to have a cohesive board that works well together, while you certainly can conceptualize giving Kevin all these things to do and that we never even get involved with them, I find that the board still would like to know in a general way what's going on. They don't want to be surprised. They want to make sure there's oversight that is occurring, even on things that to an outsider would seem quite minimal. I've observed it the other way, and it's not pretty.
As the trust dissipates, then the questions increase.
And all of a sudden your board leadership supposedly is in conspiracy with Kevin to do all these things. It just doesn't work well. So even though it takes a little more time and isn't quite as clean, I think that's one of the reasons we spend a little more time through the committees or otherwise looking at this stuff.
Kevin?
I couldn't agree more. And I think what I'd add is I think there's a difference between knowing and doing. So I think we consciously try to spend a lot of time informing the board, and we get a lot of advice back, and then not infrequently we go do it. And there is a distinction there. Some things the board really needs to grab a hold of and do. Other things the board needs to know about and provide advice to me, to the chancellors, to people at system administration.
And Kevin does, I don't know what the word does a lot without asking, as he should. I mean, he fills that gap you're talking about. But he's wise enough to let us know, too, what's happening.
And I think with the decentralization model, that's the culture the chancellors and I are trying to work on, too, so that I'm informed what they're doing on many more things than they were doing in the past, perhaps.
Boy, when I was the chancellor, I sure wanted to be informed, but I sure wanted them to do it. God love them. Okay. If you would turn to this, I think it may be the next sheet in your packet called Legacy Systems Adapt to the New Normal. Does that show up? In the interest of time, let's just go to the bottom and let me pose the second set there. Let me pose the questions, not linger on the first 4 bullets unless you're interested in pursuing them. As your 2 committees work, and if you can free up some time for a longer-term board workshop, such as Regent Crane, I think, it was at least opening the possibility for. These are some things you might think about, some of which are obvious to you and some of which may come as a bit of a surprise. This business of board culture. Is there some way, without becoming tedious, to measure what it is now? My sense is you've got something very good going. This kind of level of conversation, trust, mutual respect is at a high water mark. Not always the case many years ago. What do you want it to be in the future? Is it going to be, in a sense, more like the corporate boards that some of you serve on and work for? Is it going? How is your work going to change? How is your interaction with the chancellors and the universities and colleges going to change? I think this, frankly, is much more fundamental than saying we're going to do more of this and less of that. There's a great article, by the way, if any of you like Harvard Business Review, by a guy named Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, a Yale professor, called "What Makes Great Boards Great," and we'll get you the reference on it. It talks very much about the relationships and the trust that he thinks makes the difference between high-performing companies and those that aren't. What about the system office culture? That's an interesting thing. Whatever the intention of the board is, the mannerism in which our colleagues at the system office answer the phone, request information, do they do it, Debbie, at times when the campuses are super busy anyway, and here's one more damn thing, or is it cognizant of that? And I know Kevin and his colleagues are working around that. I personally always found, I think it's still true today, that there's a culture of helpfulness, actually, in the system office. But I think at the other end of the phone, sometimes it's not always read that way. Now, that's something that Kevin works with his colleagues on, not the board, but it's something to be sensitive to. I'm doing a little work with Connecticut, brand new system. They get a chance to break the mold. And I was talking to one of the system campus heads out there. They're called presidents. And they said, in their case, a lot of the same old arrogance. Unintentional, yeah.
What I've learned recently, and I don't know if the others would agree, but I think we should think about it, is that in a time of cultural change, which I believe we really are in, I think it is important for people in our situation to get out and talk to those who do deal with the system, because the nature of institutions is such that the system isn't going to get often a fair criticism of what is. It's just, there's too much tension between that and daily business. And I think it's something we, given our experiences, without again trying to micromanage something, can listen to and report back. And if we find that the shoe isn't fitting quite right between those the system deals with and the system personnel, we should tell that. And I'm not sure we should seek it out every moment, but we should be open to listening about it when we go to meetings, when Jeff and Mike and I the other day met with some UW-Madison governance groups, and during the course of it there were discussions about relationships and whatever, and I think it was very helpful. And it'll be helpful for Kevin to be aware of it, and it's a role I think we should think about playing, particularly at this time. But again, I don't know if that's what the board will want to do in the way of use of its time. It's just an idea.
Certainly some, and your colleagues at Maryland were very conscious of the same thing as they were going through the changes, and managed that balance between understanding what was happening at the universities and not becoming captive of them and losing perspective. The advocacy piece we've talked about a bit, and require, I think, a fair amount of more thinking through how you want to play that game going forward. And then finally, the brand thing. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but to leave your image to be defined by somebody else. particularly in these times when there's a lot of competition for resources and just the tenor of the political debate has become tighter. I think it's a mistake that boards often overlook because they know they're doing good things, they feel good about it, they assume everybody else believes that believes the same thing and they're wrong. To wrap it up, Regent President, if I may, just a couple of quick comments. Some common missteps as I've looked at these places, and I won't particularly invite a conversation about it. I'll just leave it there because I think you're absolutely on the right track. Boards that make decisions without listening to the people that have to make it work or are better informed or whatever. The University of Alaska system some years ago probably didn't have enough attorneys on the board, Mr. President.
I was just kidding.
Well, they assumed that they would have different bargaining units once they merged between the community colleges and the universities. Oops. And it turned out the faculty at the two-year institutions wound up getting paid and had the same teaching loads as those at the research universities. Just kind of a dramatic example of the dangers of thinking you know more than you do. Moving too fast. Certainly Alaska would be an illustration of that. I don't believe, as I look at the pace you're coming at this with the thoughtfulness of having these committees work but not go on forever, you're going at about the right pace, that balance between thinking it through and then taking action, which I think should come by the beginning of the summer. Some places did it too slow. It took them 4 years over in Minnesota, and they made zero progress during that period because all the people that didn't want it to happen thought they would have another opportunity to turn over the merger. The changes from the advisory committee, Kevin's proposal to you, this seems to be about the right place. And then the final thing, structure's not, and this is taking nothing away from your committee, structure's not nearly as important as relationships, trust, talent. Other systems have hired in new execs during this period who didn't understand the culture, didn't have the background. You've got tested leaders here. You've got veteran board members, so I think you're certainly in good shape in terms of the talent pool. Any final comments or questions?
No, other than to say thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I really
appreciate
enjoyed this.
You've been very helpful in accomplishing what I'd hoped we would do as we move forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good to see you all.
My hope is that we will finish right at lunchtime, and I do have to tell you that I'm going to alter our usual agenda order. I have a business commitment tomorrow. I just cannot get out of it. It's a board that I'm on in a business way that for the first time in these 6 years has had a conflict, so I won't be here, and as a result I've changed my report from tomorrow to today, just briefly. The first thing is to tell you that the reports for the Educational Communications, Higher Educational Aids, Hospital Authority, Wisconsin Technical College System boards have been provided. Does anybody have any questions or comments on any of those? All right. If not, briefly in board-related news, although you probably know it, it's been alluded to, Governor Walker visited UW-Marathon County earlier this week, where he signed Senate Bill 28 requiring regional representation. Requiring regional representation on the UW board system, Board of Regents. You will recall that our board endorsed the idea of regional representation last spring, and we are currently within one congressional district of meeting the standard of the 8. Tomorrow, you're going to get an update from Mike Falbo on the work of the Legislative Task Force, which he so effectively chairs. I had the good fortune to attend the meeting yesterday, and it was very interesting, and I know Mike will give you a report on what's happened and where it's going. Finally, let's return to our two special committees for just a moment. The Committee on Governance and Structures, composed of several regents and chancellors and chaired by Regent Smith, will present a status report tomorrow morning. The Ad hoc Committee on Roles and Responsibilities is chaired by Regent Bradley, and we will hear that committee's interim report at this moment. So I call on Regent Bradley.
Good. Thank you, President Spector. By the way, I think that the governor got a sort of an unfair rap on this geographical representation because Regent Whitburn is from East Wausau, and I'm from North Wausau. So we are spread out.
Go regional.
The Ad hoc Committee on Board Roles and Responsibilities includes myself, Regent Many Deeds, David Walsh, Mike Spector, also our Board Secretary, Jane Redoux, two Chancellors, Chancellor Dean Van Galen from UW-River Falls and Chancellor Ward from UW-Madison, and we also have Vice President Debbie Durkin. We had one meeting in November. It was very productive. You'll recall that President Spector charged us with taking a look at the roles and responsibilities and the internal structure of the board in light of the recent statutory changes giving more flexibilities to our institutions and also the ongoing efforts that we've heard about to decentralize some administrative authority. So President Spector asked us to commit to writing the key roles and responsibilities of the board and also to examine how the board can best exercise those functions and responsibilities, including taking a look at new standing committees or a modified committee structure. Initially, we were asked to have our final report ready for today, but because of scheduling difficulties where we just couldn't get everybody or a majority of people together for the second meeting, we got a special dispensation to come to you with our final report in the month of February.
A waiver was granted.
Yes. So that's my report. We're making great progress.
You're going to meet again this month, as I understand, later
yes,
this month.
We will meet again December 21st, and then we will try to come to conclusions and circulate among ourselves a draft report, and we will be ready to report to you at the February board meeting.
Great. Any questions for Mark about that? All right. We're going to break for lunch. My understanding is we're going to be served in Varsity Hall 3, which is on the second floor, and then we will reconvene at 1 o'clock for the committee meetings. And thank you very much.